Hi, everyone. So, this is a great question about what the economy in Spain looked like prior to the Spanish Civil War. So, let's get into it. So, at the start of the Spanish Civil War, Spain did have zillionaires, but they were the old school kind of zillionaires. These were aristocrats. They had large land holdings in southern Spain, in Andalusia, and in Extremadura, especially. And they were forcing their will on the peasants who worked that land. They would pay them arbitrarily and very little, if at all. And the peasants had very little power against these landed aristocrats who'd had this wealth and power for hundreds of years. There were a few exceptions to this. There were some areas of the country that had industrialized a little bit. Valladolid had some factories. Asturias had a coal mining industry. And in Barcelona, they had a textile industry that was doing pretty well. But for the rest of the country, we're talking rural farming peasants, farming the land for aristocrats. And the second part of your question is fascinating. Where else did the anarchists get up to their anarchist business? Really, it was an international movement. It was an international movement in the latter half of the 1800s, and it grew up sort of alongside socialism. But what was really interesting is I looked into this a little bit further, and I guess anarchism, there were different flavors of it. A lot of anarchists were active in union movements and they were active in workers' rights. And some of them wanted to have socialism, and some of them just wanted to work with unions and have, anarcho-capitalism. So it's sort of like the philosophy would have strains of each of these other movements and touch these other movements, but they just disagreed on the government part of it. So you ask where anarchists ever got into power. The thing is, they, on principle, didn't believe in power, and so they didn't really get into power. But they did have a lot of influence, especially in Spain, this idea that these groups of people are going to be better off just in charge of themselves and figuring out what they're going to do on their own and not having to deal with the whims of national politics. That was a really appealing philosophy to a lot of people who had been burned by whoever was in power. And especially in Spain, when historically, whether it was a monarchy or whether it was the First Republic or the dictator who was in charge before the Second Spanish Republic, like none of these governments did anything to help the working class or the rural peasants. So the idea of taking things into their own hands was appealing. So the anarchists were really influential in France. They were influential in England. There were anarchists in the United States. Apparently they were very active in China and Japan, which I thought was really interesting. And also in Argentina, there were big anarchist movements. So yeah, when I went to study abroad in Spain in the 90s, it was really interesting. I had always seen the anarchist A on people who were into punk in high school. They would draw it on their backpacks, but I don't think they really knew what it was as a political philosophy necessarily. But in Spain, it's very much alive and well. And there were, in Salamanca, where I was studying, which was a conservative city and had been on Franco's side during the Spanish Civil War and was a fairly pro-Franco town, there were medallions in the stone here and there throughout the town of the quiver of arrows. That's a symbol of the Falange, which is the fascist movement in Spain. And it's a common symbol, and you'll see it around Spain. And every year on Franco's birthday, the pro-Franco folks who still remember him fondly and miss him would put flowers under this medallion in stone. And every year on Franco's birthday, anarchists will go and spray paint over it. So it was just interesting to see the way that the war is still there. It's definitely still there.